This video was made possible through the support of my patrons. And with this 6-part serial, we come to what could have been the end of Doctor Who in 1964. Producer Verity Lambert and story editor David Whittaker had seen through 42 weeks of television when the Reign of Terror was finished. The show's fate at the time of commission was still uncertain. No matter what happened when those credits rolled in Part 6, the show would be taking a several weeks-long break, but its future was not assured. But the serial that was to end this run was originally meant to be a serial set during the Indian Rebellion of 1857, written by Dalek creator Terry Nation, titled The Red Fort. However, this was replaced with The Keys of Marinus due to production issues, so to ensure a writer for this new final serial, Terry Nation recommended writer Dennis Spooner, a friend of Nation's from his writing agency. While Spooner had written for Sci-Fi before, predominantly Gerry Anderson shows such as Stingray and Fireball XL5, he was initially dismayed when asked to write a historical story, though these concerns were assuaged somewhat when David Whittaker said that Spooner could choose any material, any time period he wanted for this Doctor Who story, and that's how we find ourselves at the French Revolution, a period in the last years of the 18th century in France which saw the proletariat rise up and violently dispose of the monarchy. It's also fitting that the director of this story is Henrik Hirsch, a Hungarian-born theatre director who came to the UK fleeing from the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. Now, this is a 6-parter which was unfortunately junked by the BBC in the early 1970s. However, episodes 1, 2, 3 and 6 were recovered from a TV station in Cyprus in 1985. Sadly, parts 4 and 5 were destroyed in a bombing strike during the Cypriot Civil War in 1974. These missing episodes were animated by Planet 55 for the 2013 DVD release, and that's the version I watched for this review. So, leading on from the end of the Censorites, it appears that the Doctor is planning to make good on dropping Ian and Barbara back home out of stubbornness. Susan is naturally quite upset about this, but they plan to depart on good terms and decide to make this a fun last adventure when they discover that they've not actually landed anywhere near London, they're just outside of Paris. The group discover this when they stumble across the most cockney lad to have ever lived.
Look, we've lost our way and we need your help. This is England, isn't it?
England? No, France.
France? Well, how far from Paris?
Not far. 12 kilometres.
The group stumble across an empty barn, and it's here they get separated when exploring, discovering that they're in the year 1794, the most violent year of the French Revolution.
The Doctor's put us down right in the middle of the French Revolution.
Yes. The Reign of Terror.
Il l'a dit.
The quartet encounter a group of counter-revolutionaries who use the barn to give information and supplies to those hoping to flee the country and escape the guillotine, but the counter-revolutionaries are violently gunned down. Susan and the school teachers are sentenced to death, and the Doctor is left unconscious inside the barn as it's burning to the ground. This first episode, titled A Land of Fear, is pretty uncompromising. The deaths of the counter-revolutionaries to Argenson and Rouvray are really uncomfortable to watch, as the revolutionary soldiers take great glee and enjoyment in chasing and killing their prey. Now, the first season of Doctor Who has already been pretty violent. Lots of death, stabbings, people falling into abysses of acid. But, I don't know, there's something about the depiction here that gives the Reign of Terror much more edge, and I think a lot of that comes from the direction by Henrik Hirsch. Hirsch was not very experienced in TV, and he found directing this serial incredibly difficult for numerous reasons that we'll get into later, and a lot of the direction does feel a bit workmanlike, but I think that pays off here, with the TV almost acting as a basic window, with very little camera trickery to filter the brutality. I think this is exemplified most at the end of part 1, when the Doctor wakes up inside the burning barn, and we're just watching an old man man coughing and choking in the smoke, helplessly banging on the door. It's genuinely quite chilling. I think this might be one of the most affecting cliffhangers of season 1 in terms of sheer, oh my god, how is the Doctor going to get out of this one? But back to the camera work, it's mainly in the pre-filmed inserts in the next few episodes with Ian that the camera frees up somewhat, but even then it's in the context of a horror show. William Russell was the only cast member to have not taken any holiday during the show's first season, so to make up for it he took 2 weeks off for parts 2 and 3 of The Reign of Terror. But in order to make the serial still work, because Ian is basically the main character this season, he appears in pre-recorded inserts. Ian, story-wise, definitely feels like a character that's been put on the back burner for The Reign of Terror, but that's fine, as it gives the Doctor, Barbara and Susan more opportunities for them to make an impact. Ian is locked up in a cell, with Barbara and Susan sharing one of their own, and that's nothing new in this series. In almost every serial, the cast have found themselves locked up to some capacity, but in The Reign of Terror, it feels different. It's dark, it's dank, the window has no good view of outside, and while Barbara and Susan are optimistic at first about digging their way out, they quickly discover...
What is it? Rats! Rats! They must have smelt the food. Barbara, there's rats down there! I can't do it anymore. Not with those down there, I can't do it. God. They won't come in. Not now. We won't do any more digging. We'll just stay where we are.
The conditions in the cell are so bad that Susan physically starts deteriorating and she's taken ill, keeping in mind that one of the group's first trips in the TARDIS was on a planet that had undergone a nuclear fallout, and Susan was able to stave off those symptoms for a while. So it's actually kind of mad that it's a prison cell in France that gives her a serious fever. Now, this is obviously a way to get Susan out of commission and set up more conflict for later, with the group needing to get her serious medical attention. But that, along with the rest of the story's presentation, helps to set The Reign of Terror apart from the rest of the season. But we can't forget that this is a story written by Dennis Spooner, a Dennis Spooner who is not particularly interested in writing history, so there's a lot more focus on comedy and vignettes, but smartly they're focused away from the prison cells and the counter-revolutionaries that Susan, Ian and Barbara get involved with. It's the Doctor who has a more light-hearted romp through Paris, as he's rescued from the burning barn by the Cockney child from earlier. He then takes his walking stick and just strides to Paris, like the Chad that he is. And we have these gorgeous bits of location filming, the very first pieces of location work in Doctor Who history, where Brian Proudfoot stands in for Hartnell. The Doctor pauses by the side of the road, but is forced into servitude by a greedy overseer. He explains that the workers digging up the road are tax dodgers, and because the Doctor can't immediately prove that he pays his taxes, the overseer forces him to work as well, and the Doctor insulting him did not help either.
Well, if you were to expend your energy helping with the road instead of bawling and shouting at them every few seconds, you might be able to get somewhere. Good day to you, sir.
I suppose you think you're very clever.
Well, without any undue modesty, yes. Now, would you mind standing aside?
Now, show me your papers or something to prove your identity.
I am not in the...
I see. You can't prove your identity.
The Doctor quickly learns, however, that the Overseer is greedy over anything else, so he pickpockets some money from the Overseer, and the Doctor pretends that he found it in the ground. The Overseer, ascribing to a finders keepers philosophy, starts digging himself, and the Doctor knocks him out with a single shovel strike. And you want to know the funniest part about this? This isn't even the only instance of the Doctor knocking out a distracted comic relief. Later on, he tries to rescue Susan from prison and instructs her to get out of sight. He informs the jailer that Susan's missing, and when the jailer investigates...
Sheila! Sheila! The young girl, she's gone! She's gone! She's gone!
Blimey, the Reign of Terror of the title isn't the bloodiest year of the French Revolution, it's the first Doctor going on a rampage, the oncoming storm indeed. It makes sense when Susan claims that this is one of his favourite periods of history.
We might not get back to the ship if Grandfather hears we're in the Reign of Terror.
Why not?
It's his favourite period in the history of Earth.
Actually, that reminds me. So, the Doctor and Susan, have they been here before? After all, the book that Susan picked up in An Unearthly Child was about the French Revolution. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. So the Doctor strides into Paris and goes to a tailor, trading in his old clothes and ring for a new uniform, one of a regional officer, and...
Ah, that's better. Thank you.
He uses his new position of supposed authority to try and figure out what happened to his granddaughter, Ian and Barbara. However, all three of them have gone. Ian managed to escape his cell when his jailer accidentally left his keys in the cell door, and Barbara and Susan's transport to the guillotine was ambushed by counter-revolutionaries. The Doctor instead winds up in a meeting with Maximilien Robespierre, the chief orchestrator of the government during this period of the French Revolution. And it's here that the story starts to lose a lot of its bite. Now, the production and the performances are incredibly strong, and they help make the setting and the sense of chaos palpable, but The Reign of Terror is not a wholly effective story if you're not acquainted with this period in history. If you're after a breakdown, or even basic contextualization for the French Revolution from either of our schoolteacher main characters, or even just the characters from 1794, you're not going to get it. We see some key figures like Robespierre and even Napoleon Bonaparte near the end, but who they actually are or their role in events is genuinely never explained. There is no mention of figures like Jean-Paul Marat, Charlotte Corday, or even Marie Antoinette. Now, I'm not expecting a full-blown history lesson. I also acknowledge that stopping the plot dead to give this context might harm the pacing, but I can imagine younger audiences watching this back in 1964, or even some people unfamiliar with the French Revolution, just being totally lost because it's hard to engage with the drama of the situation without some baseline information. But who knows, maybe in the 1950s and the 1960s, the French Revolution was a much more standardized part of our education system. It certainly wasn't when I grew up. And to the story's credit, the characters getting swept up in numerous conflicts in the French Revolution adds to the tension and the story's forward momentum. But when things slow down, particularly in Part 4, when the Doctor has to outwit Robespierre, the titular French tyrant, we don't really have any frame of reference for what's going on.
Danton planned to restore the monarchy. I had the proof, I knew. I had to dispose of him and the Gironde. Even now, convention members are at work plotting my downfall. But I will triumph, even if I have to execute every last one of them. Death! Always death! Do you think I want this carnage?
I don't even know who you are.
The closest we get to contextualization is Leon, a revolutionary who infiltrated the counter-revolutionary group, telling Ian he didn't know what France was like before the storming of the Bastille 6 years ago. But he still doesn't elaborate.
I've been loyal to the revolution from the beginning. If you'd known what France was like 6 years ago before the Bastille, you'd understand.
Barbara had grown fond of Leon earlier in the story, so when he's revealed to be a traitor after kidnapping Ian for interrogation and he's killed by the counter-revolutionaries, she does not take the news well, and we get this moment that should be terrific and really dramatically loaded about the morality of this revolution.
He was the traitor we were looking for.
It was the only way, Barbara.
He deserved to die. He was a traitor.
What do you mean? He was a traitor.
When I got to the church, he turned on me.
He was going to kill me.
He betrayed us, Barbara.
He was a traitor to you. To his side, he was a patriot.
Barbara, we've taken sides just by being here. Jules actually shot him. It could just as easily have been me.
And what about Robespierre? I suppose you think
Just because an extremist like Robespierre...
Oh, Barbara, Jules is our friend. He saved
I
our
know
lives.
all that. The revolution isn't all bad. Neither are the people who support it. It's changed things for the whole world. And good, honest people gave their lives for that change.
Well, he got what he deserved.
You check your history books, dear, before you decide what people deserve.
It's acted and written really well, but in the context of this serial, it doesn't amount to anything. There's no other statement or summation over what this serial is trying to convey other than this was a really shit year to live in. Now, is revolutionary action against selfish aristocrats based and red-pilled? Absolutely. However, it's undeniable that by the mid-1790s, the revolution had devolved into something much darker and more malicious. During the original Reign of Terror, an estimated 40,000 people were killed for, quote, crimes against liberty. The original cancel culture. I can't believe I wrote that. But that seems like set dressing in the Reign of Terror, rather than this serial actually being about the Reign of Terror. Robespierre isn't even particularly well characterised. Bonaparte turns up in part 6, and while Ian and Barbara fawn over being at this historical event, the audience don't get any further information. It just feels like a step backwards from something like Marco Polo or the Aztecs, where the French Revolution is just a setting. It's not a foundation for a story. Now, there are a couple of fun twists and turns towards the end when the British get involved. You see, in Ian's original prison cell, he was imprisoned with an English agent named Webster, who passed on a dying message to a James Sterling. He makes Ian promise to pass on this message.
Try to escape. Try. Promise to find. James Sterling. And home. Promise. Promise.
Yes, yes. James Sterling. Find James Sterling and tell him to get back to England. He has important information. I understand. And I promise.
Fun fact, Geoffrey Wickham, the actor who played Webster, recorded his dialogue scenes in the morning, and when his character died, he thought he was done for the rest of the day, so he went out drinking with his friends. When he learned he also had to portray the character's corpse for the rest of the episode, he returned to studio, absolutely sloshed, and fell asleep on set in character, waking up several hours later to find the studio empty. That's the most British thing I've ever heard. Anyway, it turns out that James Sterling is a man posing as a French government official under the name Lemaitre, who has been manipulating events throughout most of the serial. He allowed Ian to escape, he saw through the Doctor's officer disguise immediately, but ensured him access to the prison and his meetings with Robespierre. So Sterling has to infiltrate a meeting at the sinking ship in Calais, where Napoleon Bonaparte is wanting to take command after an uprising against Robespierre in July 1794. Sterling tries to stop the deposition, but as the Doctor and now Barbara have learned the hard way, they can't do anything to change history.
Robespierre will be guillotined, whatever we do.
I've told you of our position so often.
Yes, I know. You can't influence or change history. I learned that lesson with the Aztecs.
The events will happen just as they're written. I'm afraid so, and we can't stem the tide. But at least we can stop being carried away with the flood.
And the story ends as it started, with some shocking brutality, as Robespierre is surrounded by revolutionaries, and then we cut to outside his office, and we hear a gunshot off screen. Now, in real life, we don't know who fired the bullet, but whatever happened resulted in Robespierre being shot in the jaw, and despite this being a children's show broadcast at 5:30 in the afternoon, Robespierre is dragged out of his office clutching his bleeding jaw. It's genuinely brutal. Our TARDIS team managed to flee Paris in a horse-drawn carriage and make it back to the TARDIS, with history on its natural course and the group having survived, with the Doctor giving a lovely speech before Doctor Who's first season draws to a close.
Our lives are important, at least to us. But as we see, so we learn.
And what are we going to see and learn next, Doctor?
Well, unlike the old adage, my boy, our destiny is in the stars. So let's go and search for it.
Let's start wrapping up by talking briefly about the animation by Planet 55. This was the company's first attempt at a Doctor Who reconstruction, coming several years after Cosgrove Hall's work on the lost episodes of the second Doctor story, The Invasion, and despite the detailed character models and some occasionally fluid movement, it's a bit of a mess. Much has been said about the quick cutting of the conversation scenes, especially considering how the other episodes aren't remotely presented like this, and even the scenes without dialogue are so strangely put together, like the establishing shots of Barbara and Susan at the Rebels' house. It's so jarring, with characters hopping around and some really uncomfortable close-ups. The cuts are so frequent and disconnected that I genuinely just tuned out for a minute and stopped following the story. I also can't help but notice that the angles are almost completely straight on with the faces and at neck level, which really limits the type of shots and the storyboarding. I'm not expecting or demanding brilliant storyboarding, but this feels like such a strange, self-imposed limitation. Also, while I do like the eye movements that help the characters feel alive, the mouth movements are stilted and the 3D faces on 2D assets never quite gelled with me. The costume work and the shading is strong, as are the backgrounds, but even those backgrounds are inconsistently presented. Sometimes they're out of focus, and sometimes they're as clear as the character models in the foreground. Obviously, an animated reconstruction is better than nothing, but this definitely comes across as an experimental first attempt, and Planet 55 would thankfully do better moving forward. The Reign of Terror overall, though, is a mood. It's got great pacing, with the characters being thrown into deadly situation after deadly situation with little respite. While the French Revolution in its specifics feels like an incidental detail, the concept of treachery and a hostile citizenry runs through the whole serial. One of my favourite diversions has Barbara visit a pharmacist with Susan to get her treated. However, the pharmacist is suspicious of them and claims to leave to get ingredients only to lock them in his establishment and get the authorities. The Doctor trades his clothes and ring for a disguise, only for the tailor to try and hand over his ring to James Sterling as evidence for treachery. This is how the Doctor gets the ring back, incidentally. The production work is also really strong, with limited but effective location work, great lavish sets, terrific costuming, my god does Hartnell look terrific in that uniform, and effective direction. Unfortunately, director Henrik Hirsch would never work for the BBC again after this. He found directing the serial incredibly stressful and difficult due to his lack of experience, the limitation of Lime Grove Studios, and lead actor William Hartnell giving him a really hard time because Hartnell didn't like foreigners, so that's a thing. Before the filming of Part 3, Hirsch actually collapsed in studio from the stress, and another director had to take over that week. When Hirsch returned, some of his workload was delegated to production assistant Timothy Coombe, who also had a word with Hartnell, asking him to back off, and the rest of the episodes came together much easier. That and Doctor Who's production moving to the much bigger Riverside studio in Hammersmith, which would soon become Doctor Who's home for years to come. It was clearly a very challenging production for everyone involved, but the end results are very impressive. You've got live horses, a huge cast, and if you exclude Marco Polo as it's a missing story, The Reign of Terror easily has the most ambitious, surviving episodes of Doctor Who's first season. Stanley Myers put together a pretty comprehensive musical score for the serial as well. Very moody, a massive range of instruments, it matches the intensity and the scale of the serial really well. I think The Reign of Terror is a serial where I will remember individual scenes and moments for a long time to come. It has great performances, Dennis Spooner's trademark strong character work and dialogue, and I'm not gonna lie, there are a few scenes and moments where my jaw was on the floor with how intense and brutal this children's serial was. But I still feel like The Reign of Terror was just a few changes and alterations away from being an all-time classic. It's incredibly dense, and does practically nothing to engage the uninitiated. I also found myself gravitating more towards the comic relief characters, as opposed to the more serious, plot-specific cast members, but that's likely because I'm a simple man at heart. For a six-parter, it doesn't feel its length, because it does feel like a historical epic at its heart. I just wish it let its audience in a bit more beyond the surface-level depiction of a world-changing decade. By a funny coincidence, while editing and making this review, I actually found myself in Paris, France. We came here for my wife, mon ami, mon coeur's 30th birthday. So this is Place de la Concorde, but in the late 18th century it was known as Revolution Square. It was in this square where around 2,500 people were executed for the French Revolution, including Maximilien Robespierre, who is at the heart of the Doctor Who story The Reign of Terror, who was executed here in 1794. And in the episode he is portrayed as getting shot in the jaw during his arrest, and when he was shot he was bandaged up around the jaw to make sure he could actually make it to his execution. And then during his execution, the executioner ripped the band-aid off and he screamed, he roared like a lion according to witnesses at the time, and he was only silenced by the blade. And then when he died there was apparently a 15-minute rapturous applause from the crowd. Now the reason I bring up that story is because in the Reign of Terror Doctor Who story it is very much from a mid-20th century outsiders looking in perspective. You know, the British people are trapped during the Reign of Terror in the story and they have to try and escape and survive. And I think the subject of remakes within the Doctor Who community is something that we don't talk about that often, because I think we want originality, we want more original, bold stories. But I also think that we should revisit time periods that I think were maybe neglected, or we didn't get the full scope of the historical event during the original retelling. And I think if the Reign of Terror were to be made today, it would be made with a similar approach to, say, The Fires of Pompeii by James Moran, where part of that story is seen through the perspective of a family in Pompeii living through the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And I think a remake of a story like The Reign of Terror, or maybe remake is the wrong word in a conventional sense, but a revisitation of that time period of the French Revolution, but maybe seen through the perspectives of those who lived through it, rather than the British 1964 perspective of the outsiders looking in. As for the future of Doctor Who, well, on the day that Part 1 was recorded, Verity Lambert got a call from the higher up. After a brief break, Doctor Who was guaranteed for another 3 months, with the possibility of 3 more months afterwards. However, thanks to some pushback from the lead actors, this deal was changed and contracts were signed to guarantee the show for another 6 months and a second season. Except for Carole Ann Ford, who was already making plans to leave the show. But that's a story for another time. For now, Doctor Who would live on after a 6-week break. It's time for Season 2, so join us next time as we follow our heroes for more adventures, starting with a story that will cut them down to size and have them see the world a bit differently, in Planet of the Giants. I'll see you next time. Hey folks, we made it. We got to the end of Season 1. Oh, and what's that over my shoulder? Is that Season 2? Oh, exciting stuff. Anyway, first things first, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought of this review and the Reign of Terror in the comments section below. And also be sure to subscribe if you want more Doctor Who related videos, and also hit that like button because it really helps me out. I also like to give a massive shout out to my patrons, because without them, these videos would not be possible. So you should be seeing their names scrolling down on the screen right now, but I'd like to give a shout out to these particular patrons: Adam Grattan, Angus Bajanason, Callum Baird, Chiba City Blues, Dan the Dreamer Shill, Daniel Davis, Darius, Darkstar2189, Darren Carver-Bausiger, Dean Jones, Dr. Hadley, Dragonbugs, Dylan Whitaker, Evil Dalek 79, Finley Rude, Flipseed, Ginger Animator, Hunter Graham, Jack D. Evans, James Ivory, Joseph Adams, Leela, Maria Bergman, Mario Fanboy 15, Matthew Perry, Michael Serrano, Miranda Logan, Nate Harris, Palex, Pat Andrews, Randall Sprinkle, Raven Woods, Reese Lloyd, Ross, Ryan Duncan, Samuel Whitaker, Scott Gerard, Taylor Wooderson, The Brit Sniper, Timbo1834, Toby Loxton, and Will. Thanks so much to all of my patrons. Many of those patrons have also got access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server, so if you want to know more about that, check out the Patreon link in the description below. And that's that. That's Season 1 of Doctor Who. Thank you so much for sticking with me so far, and I hope you're excited as I am for Season 2. I'll see you folks next time.